My name is Benjamin Kintisch, and what is my title? Oh, I guess I'm creator of Life Review Musical.
That's a good one. Uh, can you tell me when you fell in love with music?
Sure. I think as a little kid, I had fabulous music teachers coming up. Um, they were really impactful. Mrs. Thomas in elementary school, Mrs. Anderson in middle school, several different chorus teachers in high school, and Bert Hughes, my band and music theory teacher in high school. Sadly died about a year ago, but became a friend of mine as an adult. So music teachers loomed large my whole life, and then I went and became one, in addition to being a playwright, a chaplain, and a cantor.
What is it like now being on the other side teaching students?
You know, I love it. I really I love being a music teacher every day. We're just getting started, it's September, so back to school time. So I saw a couple classes today that I haven't seen yet, and some that were with me for the second time, right? So it's all about getting routines. This is how we take out the drums and put them back. This is how we use pencils, all that stuff. Um, but the good news from the trenches is that the children still like singing and dancing and making music, and I enjoy doing that with them. So always a good time to make music. And I happen to work at a really nice school, which helps. It's a small Quaker private school called Friends Community School in College Park, Maryland. So, it doesn't mean it's always easy, but having worked in some very challenging public schools, I'll tell you, it's nice at this point in my career to have landed at a beautiful private school where the kids are pretty chill.
What inspired you to create a musical?
So I've always loved musical theater. I didn't know I wanted to write a musical someday, but I did know I was a songwriter who was getting better at his craft. So through my 20s, when I was studying to be a cantor, I co-wrote some of my first songs, and those were pretty good. Um, the musical that I created, which is called Life Review, the Hospice Musical, that was inspired by real life experiences as a hospice chaplain. So when I went into the chaplain work, I was training. I didn't expect to be writing songs. I knew I was a songwriter, and so songwriters are always kind of paying attention to things that move them, stories that inspire them, right? So shortly into my time, I was doing rounds, which of course includes making visits bedside. And I was hearing stories from people that I found beautifully moving. Uh, Funny stories, surprising stories, shocking stories, nostalgic stories, all manner. One night I called my wife on the way home and I said, "Honey, I think these stories want to be songs." And she said, "Ben, get writing." So that night, I took out one of those journal books, started scribbling notes for what would become my first song called Will It Still Snow. That song was the first one I created. It led to several others. Fast forward a few years, I had written lyrics. I worked with some composers to make proper songs, co-write styles. Um, and eventually, I had enough songs to make a musical. I thought it was going to be a musical from the beginning. My original composer, um, collaborator, Michael, his name is Jason Spiewak. He was like, "Dude, let's just do a concept album. That way it's 5 songs. It's like a manageable goal." I think that was good advice, and I also disagreed with him at the time. I'm like, "We're definitely doing a musical." He's like, "Let's start with 5 songs and see where we are after that. If you're still going, good for you." But he was in the music business. I was just a silly, naive person, having not done this before. Um, and we were both right. So he was right that it was a good idea to get started with something smaller. I was right that there was a musical. Several years later now, we've created the full thing, 16 songs, dialogue. It's a fully fleshed production. I've also condensed it to a one-man show, which I had to do during COVID.
Yeah.
And that's something that I now perform regularly for house concerts. I'm about to appear at the Charm City Fringe Festival that's in Baltimore City. So 4 appearances there. That's exciting. Going to be performing at the State Hospice Association in Illinois next
Oh,
spring.
wow.
Got a couple synagogue gigs coming up. So the one-man show is nimble, right? It's just me. I have an iPad with digital tracks. I play guitar for a few. So that's easy to travel. However, I should mention to you every time I make an appearance, Michael, I like to tell my audience I am looking for a theatrical partner to stage this thing, to stand it up. So if you're listening and you find what I'm talking about compelling, please do get in touch. I am looking for a theatrical partner to try to stand up the full ensemble show.
How did the people at hospice and their families help shape you and your creative process?
Oh, beautiful questions, Michael. I think you can see echoes of this throughout the show, but I'll just tell you directly that some of the most profound spiritual moments I've ever had happened in my work as a chaplain. I did 2 years in hospice care, 2 years in elder care as part of my 4 years of chaplaincy training. And, different populations, but the global comments are similar, right? Which is that one-on-one visits with people when they are in their time of need, when they are in what we call in the chaplain business in spiritual distress. It's a moment of not just neediness, but a particular kind of yearning, right? Sometimes it's a religious person who's having a crisis because things didn't turn out the way they hoped despite their prayer and regular church or synagogue or mosque attendance. Sometimes it's someone who's been an atheist all their life, and now that they're facing down their mortality, they're grasping at straws, and they're wondering if it's not too late to make a prayer. And I tell them, sure, we can pray. Or if they're not into prayer, I might just, and they're like fiercely atheist and non-religious, I can still be a comfort and play some nice songs, I have here's a prop today. This book is a pocket version of a famous song leader's book, and in it contains about 2,000 songs, just
Oh,
the
wow.
lyrics and chords, so it's very condensed. So I have that in my backpack guitar bag, and so when I visit room to room, if someone is verbal and in the mood for it, I can offer a variety of music as part of my ministry, so to speak. It's not conventional chaplain style, but it's leaning on my strengths. I found it very useful. Sometimes memory patients who don't talk very much, you start singing a song and then they know every word. I've had moments where people, like I discover someone's a veteran and then they love patriotic songs. And every time I see them, I'm singing You're a Grand Old Flag and God Bless America. And they just love it. Which is not a so-called straight and narrow version of chaplaincy. I will say that even those visits with a sing-along, I will offer prayer as part of the goodbye ritual. And I might say something like, God, thank you for the blessing of song, and thank you for the gift of music, and thank you for bringing us together and the joy that we shared. Amen. Right? So it's a little bit of extemporaneous prayer. But it sort of gives what I call a sprinkle of holiness on the moment that we just shared. Other people are more devout and they'll say, I want to do the Lord's Prayer. And I'll say, go ahead, do what you want to do. But more often than not, the visit it's almost like a counselor, but with a little bit of prayer at the end, which makes it feel holy and sacred.
Yeah, how important is faith of any kind, for, mental health care?
I don't believe that having a faith tradition is a necessity for good mental health. but the trappings of faith communities are often beneficial for people in general, right? So if you think about, if you're listening today and you go to church or synagogue or mosque or any other house of worship, and you do so regularly, you know that builds in a certain routine that includes seeing the same people, maybe a little bit of education. The sermon is a type of education. For me, as someone who loves singing, when I go to synagogue as a Jew in the pew, as opposed to working up front, which I'm also I used to be a synagogue cantor, so I used to always be up front singing at the people. I'll tell you, different experience for sure. But when I'm sitting in the audience and singing along, it's fun for me, just as a guy who likes to sing, right? So I know if I go regularly to synagogue, it's going to bring some joy to my life. If I have a tendency to be a little bit inward when I'm not at school, and I do, going to synagogue kind of forces me to be like a little social with some people in my community, right? They're generally glad to see me. And honestly, now that I'm not in their employ anymore, I'm just a fellow congregant and not their clergy person, I can be a little bit more choosy about who I chat with and who I just say, hey, nice to see you, and I go the other direction. See, when you're clergy, Michael, you got to be nice to everyone. It's part of the job. I don't know if I answered your question. Well, coming back to it, I'll just say, you said faith and mental health. So I think there are a lot of people who are into organized religion who like to espouse what I mentioned in passing, right? That if you go to church or synagogue or mosque regularly, you're going to be part of a community, and that has some benefits. I think, to me, that feels reasonable. As a person growing up, I enjoyed synagogue life. I think of it fondly. That's probably part of the reason why I ended up going to seminary for 5 years to become a cantor, right? Because I loved synagogue life at its best moments. Not always an easy place to work, but that's not your question. But I will say that when faith and a faith community results in a positive community moment, that's going to be good for your mental health, right? A feeling of belonging, a feeling of, let's say, shared purpose.
Yeah.
And nice social opportunities. To take the example of the synagogue I belong to, they have a klezmer band, which is, Jewish musicians doing Eastern European dance band music from the olden country. So, there's some random guy who plays accordion. He never comes to services, but for him, his synagogue life is being part of the band, and he's a member, and that's his thing, right? So it's kind of like a cultural affiliation for him. I know some people who are into activism, and there's some sort of activist committee. There's some people who are into gardening. You get the picture. Many of them, probably most of them, gather on the big holidays that come up in a few more weeks. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. You would have to ask each one, how is their personal faith journey and personal faith involvement good for them, right? So I'm speaking in kind of general platitudes, but I know for a fact that religion is a group activity practiced by many individuals. And I like to remind people, as a former clergy person myself, as a trained chaplain, that whatever your particular personal faith journey is totally unique and cannot be assumed to be similar or shared by the other people you meet, even if you all go to the same church, synagogue, mosque, right? I sometimes forgot that when I was up front, but there are certain things that we all do together, right? If there are hymns or songs that are part of the service, we're all going to do that. But when there's the moment of private prayer, some of us might be engaged in a deep devotion, a meditation, some sort of transcendental something, and others will totally be bored. And they're like, when does this dreadful moment of silence end? And they quickly sit or they use the restroom. Let me tell you, no judgment, because there are different modalities of prayer. And I should also say I focused in on faith communities because I'm a synagogue professional, but you asked it more broad, right?
Well, I
how
like
does
your
faith...
answer of you, so that's good too.
Well, right. So I answered as a former synagogue
Yeah.
professional. On the wall that you can't see, the one that I'm looking at, are two very expensive diplomas from aforementioned seminary. So if nothing else, all of that time and treasure afforded me to be able to speak thoughtfully about religion on the fly. I do want to say something different, though.
Yeah.
For the many people who are not currently belonging to a structured faith community, you might still consider yourself a person of faith. A recent famous Pew survey that does these periodic studies about faith in public life have found that for the generation that I believe is 40 and under, don't quote me on it, but let's call it youngish adults, we are more often than not, and I'm older than 40, I'm 44, full disclosure, but like for youngish people, non-affiliated is the biggest religious group in America right now. Despite the outsized political influence of some of our right-wing Christian friends, and right-wing Jews for that matter, who are very big on right-wing politics, the majority of Americans under 40 are not affiliated, which is a major change for our religious scene. And so it means that I shouldn't assume that your average listener goes to church, synagogue, or mosque, because that's not the average American anymore. A lot of people do, but statistically more don't. So those people, what are their faith traditions? For some of them, they talk about being faithful as having kind of an optimistic spirit, believing that they have the divine in themselves, which is a phrase that we Quakers use. I'm Jewish, by the way, but I work at a Quaker school, so I sometimes say we Quakers. But there are kind of like what I would call religious-infused self-help and philosophical movements, and I'm not using the word self-help derisively. I love some of it. A good example is like Gabby Bernstein, who I love. Look her up if you want to like put some positive spirit in your life. She has this whole book called The Miracle. Miracles May Happen. And to my ear, it feels like a lot of religious talk. She does not cite scripture, right? She sold 1 million books and then some. Beautiful stuff. I believe that her philosophy builds very much on the faith that positive things can and will happen when you take steps to, acknowledge blessings and practice gratitude, when you, all of these things that are kind of religious adjacent, but I believe give great hope and faith to people. So there's kind of this whole world of new age adjacent self-help that to my eye and ear is very much like religious adjacent, but appeals to those who are seeking but don't want to go to church or synagogue or mosque, right? So for those people, again, what I said about synagogue or church or mosque, similar but slightly twisted, right? So if you are seeking and finding meaning in self-help, in the new age, in metaphysical practice, in meditation, in yoga, in journaling, in walking in nature, all of these things are kinds of spiritual practice for some people. For others, they're hobbies that remain purely secular and nominally inspirational. So I think what's important to my mind is that if seeking something bigger than yourself is important to you, I encourage you to seek it out in your home faith tradition first, if that's still a place that feels comfortable and welcoming, acknowledging that there are plenty of adults who have chosen to leave behind their childhood faith tradition for whatever reasons, traumatic and otherwise. So if you've decided to leave your home house of worship, but you still feel the need to seek, I encourage you to seek in any of those alternative routes that I've mentioned. Through self-help, through meditation, through various new age practices. Maybe even like visiting the church or synagogue of a loved one. See if that speaks to you. Because there's no, I mean, I know some more traditional adherents might disagree with this, but this is me as like kind of a lefty liberal guy. I believe that people can safely find meaning where they seek, as long as they're not aggressively pushing it on others. It's sort of the do no harm philosophy. So, but again, returning to your question from a few minutes ago now, it's how does faith help people with mental health? There are some basic questions to being a person in this world for which the rational mind has no good or satisfying answers. Here's a favorite one that I deal with in my play. Why do we live and die? Why do people suffer? Why do some good people die too early? You know, the righteous man or righteous martyr paradox, if you will. You know, if there's a God, why is there still starvation, suffering, disease, right? These are all very big questions, and by rattling them off, you know I've thought about them, and you're nodding with familiarity because they're kind of familiar moral quandaries for the believing person. If you don't believe in a higher power, a lot of those moral questions can be just dismissed for, like, you know, science. But if you believe in a higher power and with it a moral order, then the moral quandaries become really thorny. That's something that the character, that a fictional version of myself in the play wrestles with. You know, he's a faithful man whose parents have died, apparently at a youngish age, right? So he's like, God, can you hear me even if I have nothing to say? If nothing's going my way, God, are you near me? That's the opening stanza, and I think it encapsulates the faith conundrum of so many people who believe that things ought to be the right way. We believe in a sense of good and evil. Maybe that's a bit, dare I say, pediatric, that we were taught when we were young children, and then the first time things go terribly wrong, it's a bit of a faith crisis. This is something our main character, Rabbi David Goodman, goes through in the play early on when things are going so bad at work and he thinks he's going to be fired and he's sad and lonely and he looks to the heavens. His big song is, God, you know, it's send me a sign. Now, for those of us who are not professional religious people, we might not have such a dramatic moment, but I think all of us, Michael, whether we consider ourselves pious or atheists or anywhere in between, all of us try to find our place in the universe. All of us struggle with meaning, especially when bad stuff happens. When we are in crisis, we tend to find we tend to find ourselves lost and unmoored. Think of the storm. The biblical metaphor that's so beautiful is after the storm comes the rainbow. That's from Noah. I allude to that in one of my songs. It's sort of an Easter egg for the people who know their Bible. But I think for a lot of secular people, the miracle of the rainbow, how often do we see a rainbow? Once a year if we're lucky, if we're looking for it. But I don't think I see a rainbow every year. So when I get to see a real rainbow, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's always awesome. Yeah.
It's awesome. And that word awesome, Michael, is a religious word.
It is?
The word awesome comes from the world of religiosity. It has since been like co-opted by surfers and skaters, and now it's just like another word for great. But if you look in your Bible or your prayer book, you'll see words like awesome, like how awesome art thou. It comes from the
That's
Hebrew.
my main word to go to, so.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I just added a little chaplain sprinkle of religiosity, as I'm wont to do, by noticing your words. But this is where I think the non-church going person finds their, we could call it God moment, or let's say higher power moment
Yeah.
is when we pay attention to the miracles all around us. That's one of the lessons I try to bring forward in my play, and in a sense, in my regular life, when I'm teacher of children, I try to impart rather a sense of wonder. And I think to finally close the loop on that question, a faith tradition helps us to find wonder, to notice the miracles in the everyday and the humdrum. Just over my shoulder are two pieces of beautiful art. Someone channeled that spirit and made something beautiful, and it brings something special to my space. Over my other shoulder, oh no, it's gone. I have to change the camera. There's something I made in a moment of inspiration, and it came out really nice, and I put it on my wall next to the real stuff. Like,
It
what
does
an
look good.
amazing miracle
Yeah.
when we kind of do something with our hands. We make something beautiful. We paint. If we're writers, we write a good poem or a song. Even if you don't believe in God, it's kind of a miracle when you make something from nothing. It's something that I find great inspiration in. It so happens, Michael, that while I'm not currently working as a clergy person, I continue to be involved in the Jewish community, and I do an annual songwriting retreat that is Jewish-oriented. And we do a bunch of musical praying morning and night, and then the rest of it is songwriting time, different kinds of workshops. I love it. And it's like, these are my people. And some of the moments feel very spiritual and religious, and some moments it's just like, I just feel comfortable, right? And that's cool. But I'll tell you, there are some moments when, to use a Christian phrase now, the Spirit runs through me, and I get a lyric, and my pen is off to the races, and my pen can barely keep up with my brain. It's a dangerous problem, because if I think too fast and I lose the lyric, I'm like, oh wait, what was that idea? So I got to write fast. That to me feels like a miraculous moment. So that may be where I'm at my faith journey right now. That part of my ministry, so to speak, is sharing the work I've created, and also like leaving space for the Spirit to run through me again for more writing. And yes, I'm working on more projects and more songs all the time.
Well, thank you for answering that question. It was a big one. When you perform for people with the musical, what has the feedback been?
So I'm proud to say overwhelmingly positive. I advertise it as a musical comedy, and I swear it's funny in addition to sad. So people laugh, and yes, people cry. Those emotional moments are powerful in a big room, but also, Michael, I've done several house shows. I've appeared at Fringe Festivals. So those performances will be smaller audiences, 20 to 40 people, which means they're sitting close. I mean, the house show, they might be 5 or 10 feet away. So that moment when they're crying, that's intense, right? That's powerful. So people feel vulnerable enough to have those emotional moments. I think that also speaks to the power of the piece, right? I've chosen a difficult topic, right? Specifically hospice care, but more broadly, life and death stuff, mortality, illness, loss, grief. These are not easy topics. I know. So when I wrote it, I wanted to have, let's call it a comfortable up and down pace of comedy and tragedy. To quote one of my favorite all-time musicals, it does take a spoonful of sugar to make the medicine go down. That's Mary Poppins.
Yes.
And I've been trying to find that balance with this show because of the heavy subject matter, to have some good comedy in between, have some funny songs as well as sad songs. So people are giving me rapturous applause. They're giving me tears. They're giving me laughter. So the feedback is great. When I appeared at Asheville Fringe a year ago, I got some wonderful written comments. I'm hoping at the upcoming Charm City Fringe, I'll have enough of my friends and family filling the audience that I'll win a prize. That seems to be the trick, is if you're local, you get everyone you know to vote for you, and then you win a prize. I hope I haven't disillusioned your wonderful viewers and listeners by saying that, but I discovered
No,
in
bring the
Nashville,
crew. Yeah.
well, I mean, it was nice to be invited from out of town, and Nashville, North Carolina is a great city. But everyone who's local, they have all their friends come to the shows and they get the vote. So it happens. But that said, regardless of vote tallies, the written feedback I've gotten has been really beautiful. I should also mention, Michael, because this project is 10 years in the running, I wouldn't say it's like etched into stone, but like I feel pretty good about where it is. I imagine when we stand it up on stage, there will be another round of revisions to come.
Yeah.
Hopefully not a wholesale, but like tweaking. But along the way, if your listeners are curious, a musical typically goes through many rewrites. We've had 2 full workshops that occurred before COVID. One was a 10-song concert version with an audience. One was the full 16 songs, again, with a big audience. That was 2 months before COVID hit. So from both of those shows, we got written feedback, as well as people kind of talking to me and giving me interviews to give what I would call like almost mini focus groups. So all of that feedback was helpful for me as a playwright. Here's a funny example. That first show, Michael, that was, again, like a concert version at a conference. So we had about 100 people in the audience. And I passed out feedback forms to get like written feedback. And the only thing that everyone agreed on was lose the love story. In the original version, the chaplain fell in love with the nurse. It was totally predictable, a little lighthearted. Everyone hated it. 100% rejected the love story. I've never gotten more emphatic response on anything I've created. Now, it didn't mean that the play was bad. They just didn't like that. So I cut it. So the chaplain will never again fall in love with the nurse. And the people who talked to me in person, they were like, you don't need it because he's going to have his journey without a cutesy ending. Right? Just by like being bad as chaplain and then better at the end, he's had his hero's tale. And like most of the drama, it turns out, is happening around him. Which I've discovered from some playwrights who've seen the work or given me feedback. It's a little controversial because you're supposed to have the main dramatic tension be the main character. But chaplains, they go into the room and they hear everyone else's story.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to honor that in the way I structure the play. So he makes all these visits, asks questions, and then the stories come to life through song. And I believe that's going to work, and I think it already does. And I say it with a little bit of uptalk because until I make it all the way to Broadway or off Broadway, I don't know how it's going to be when we get there. I know where it is now, and I know that we're going to continue to revise as I go. But the good news, and the reason why I'm persistent 10 years in, literally 10 years in, because I keep getting wonderful feedback. You know, it began when I first shared that earliest song to a room full of people at a conference, and half the room was crying. And that was when a songwriter, Sue Horowitz, the same person who runs that retreat, she came up to me and she said, Ben, you've created something of great power here. Is there more material? I said, yeah, there is. She said, you got to keep working on it, please. And so that was a very important piece of feedback early on that inspired me to keep going. I want to pause here for a second to give a cheer for anyone out there. If you're listening or watching and you're working on a song or an artistic project, or a novel, a short story, anything that is private right now, I encourage you to be brave and share it with one person. Maybe share it with someone who loves you, so they'll guarantee be nice. But as long as it's 100% private, you have not honored the beauty of your work. It's better than you think, but you got to start by sharing it with someone. All right, stepping off my soapbox. It took me the nerve to share it with someone, in this case, a room of people, which was extra scary. I knew I could write good lyrics, right? I didn't know if I could write a ballad that would make people cry. Okay, apparently I can. Apparently I've written several. But it took that first sharing and that feedback, that emotional outpouring from the room, the specific encouragement from a professional songwriter to believe that I could really do this thing. So that feedback very early on was critical for my creative journey.
So what are some of the other things you're working on?
Thanks for asking, Michael. I have 2 musicals that are kind of actively in progress and one that's a little bit on the back burner. The main one I've been working on this past summer is called Bird Feeder the Musical. This is a more lighthearted work. It is, I'm going to call it a family-friendly musical, but I don't want to shoehorn myself into the children's-only market because there have been plays like Susical, which is known as a family-friendly play, but made it all the way to Broadway. So why not, right? So this play, Bird Feeder the Musical, is an ensemble show. Yes, it's a musical comedy, and it's a bunch of birds of different species living it up at one backyard bird feeder that looks a lot like the bird feeder in my backyard. You have the main big story, the dramatic story, is a love affair between a native backyard bird and a migratory bird. So they fall in love in the first act, and then they have to go. One has to fly away. It's very sad. I won't tell you if he comes back or not.
Yes.
I hope he does. I haven't written that part, but I've written several songs so far. One of the composers from Life Review, Michael Miller, was at that Jewish songwriting retreat. He and I did a couple co-writes, and it's very exciting when you start something at the retreat and it's done before the retreat is ended, because then you get to perform and everyone cheers for you. It's like a big to-do. So we did that with one song from our show, and now all the other people are excited for us. The other one that is a little bit in the back burner is another workplace musical. This is called Chorus Class, the Musical. That one is inspired by my former job as a chorus teacher in middle school. So leaning heavily into the drama of adolescence. And I seem to like putting myself on stage by making musicals about my job. So this is the second one in that vein. I don't think I want to do a synagogue musical, oy vey. But I guess I could someday. I've had a lot of jobs, so if I keep churning these out, I could do a roofing musical, I could do a landscaping musical. But let's stick to number 2 and 3. Musical number 4 is a co-write that I started during COVID. It's like a new version of Little Mermaid, but different. Sorry, it's not really Little Mermaid. It's just a mermaid story.
Okay.
Kind of fairy tale thing. So I've written a few songs for that. It's kind of stuck, and hopefully we'll unstuck it someday. I also write children's songs left and right. So I think I've got at least one children's album in me. It's a thing that happens when you're a music teacher. Sometimes you're just like walking around with your guitar, your ukulele, and it happens. So that happens to me, and that's part of the work I'm working on. Though if I was going to do that same answer again, short, I would say my next musical is called Bird Feeder the Musical. My wife says I need an editor. She's right.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
I've I've got what I call Team Ben. I'm a very needy person, high functioning, interesting dude. But I've got my wife who's supportive, my father-in-law who's kind of a professional mentor. Currently in between therapists, but I'm usually in therapy. I take anti-anxiety medicine. I have a very active exercise life, which is important for me. It includes at least 2 or 3 miles of walking a day with my various dogs, plus swimming at least 2 times a week. Probably want to be doing some yoga as well, but we'll get into that when I can. I'd say for me, my musical life is very important to my mental health.
Yeah.
I, like many creative people, I like to say I ride that emotional roller coaster hard. And whether I'm on an up or a down, it's important for me to stay engaged with my music, right? So that includes like a busy day at home when I need to do this thing for work and this thing for work, that I also include 15 minutes at the piano. And I also include later on 10 or 15 minutes of ukulele. Both because it's good for my craft and because it's good for my heart and soul. The last thing, I mean, you asked earlier in our conversation about faith and mental health. So I think in the different ways that I engage in moments of faith, I find that helpful. So right now, when I perform this show, it's a great feeling of buoyancy for me. It's a big boost psychologically and mentally. And because it's such a joy, I try to keep performing it and sharing it. I'm a pretty lucky guy in that I love my work. I had a long, busy day teaching music today, but it's a great day at work, so no complaints there. I know not all of us are blessed with jobs that keep us up or keep us happy and fulfilled. I'm aware of how blessed I am. I've had a lot of tough school jobs along the way, so glad to have landed one that's a very happy place to be.
What are some of the things you've learned from your wife?
From my wife?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Yes, that's an easier question than life.
Yes, I'm not going that deep.
Or strife. Or fife. See, that's Ben the lyricist. I just always have 7 rhymes available. So my wife is named Ilana. I've learned from her to be patient. I've learned from her to embrace the quiet now and again. I've learned watching her how to be caring and loving in different ways with different energies than I bring. We're very yin and yang. Though, despite in my interview moment, I'm very high energy and talkative. Later on, I'll get quiet again. But that's kind of the roller coaster, right? She's more steady. She's more of that monorail. Not without emotion, as she likes to remind me, still waters run deep, right?
Right.
And that's how Alana is. She's also a wonderful parent. We are the proud parents of 1 human daughter and 2 dogs. Not biological children, for the record. But our daughter, I'll call her D to respect her privacy. She's 13, and she's generally quite terrific. But like all 13-year-olds, not always easy. Or as we like to say, sometimes she is very age appropriate. So we are very supportive of one another. We're a good team as parents. And, we're both trained as educators in different ways. She's a school counselor and has worked in schools for several decades. I'm trained in both music and special ed. So we love to talk shop. And so in a certain way, by exchanging stories and reflecting, we can help each other with tricky kids as they come up. So I learn a lot from her professionally as well as personally and emotionally.
So how can people reach out to you and learn more?
Thank you for that. So we'll start with the website. It's called lifereviewmusical.com. I'll type it into the chat box. And Michael will share it out whenever you post this.
I'll put graphics
on the website,
and everything.
beautiful. On the website, you'll find a great trailer video, professionally produced and edited with live footage from our big show that happened right before COVID. So you'll hear some musical clips and some nice audience feedback. You can also look at our amazing winding journey. I mean, how does it take 10 years to write a musical? Read all about it. If you like hearing me yammer, as my daughter says, there's links to about 20 different podcast interviews up there and counting. So lots to learn. If you want to get into, and on the website, there's a contact form. You can sign up for occasional updates as well as a direct message to me. So if you're interested in partnering for a theatrical production or bringing me out for the one-man show, I travel all around the world, and I can also do the streaming show. The streaming show is a little bit more affordable, but it does still cost. And I can also travel and do in-person engagements. I've done fundraisers, I've done clinical trainings, I've done big synagogue and church shows. You've heard about Fringe Festivals, so can perform at cultural events. You name it, I'll do it. I'm also available to do trainings. So if you're involved with a clinical organization, a hospital, a hospice, nursing home, elder care facility, faith community of whatever type, available to do the show and then a training module afterwards. That involves some discussion, reflections on the lyrics. It's really good, engaging. So be in touch if you want to learn more about that. And then, of course, I'm on Instagram at Life Review Musical, at Life Review. He's typing and he's talking. At Life Review Musical, there it is. And I do reels all the time. I take photographs. I sing. And you can DM me. I'll answer right away. Again, because I'm a one-man show, I am ready to travel, ready to make an appearance. Or, one last thing, I love to say this on every appearance I do, Michael. If you are a creative person, I already addressed you earlier in the project, or in the interview, encouraging you to share your work with the world. Remember that?
Yep.
So if you want a little bit more cheerful encouragement, find me on Instagram, DM me, and I will encourage you in your journey. This is for real. If you've got a musical, if you've got a story, if you've got a novel, I'm professionally trained as an encourager because I'm a school teacher, but it's also sincere. I mean, I've been through this journey. I mentioned that it was so important for me to have real songwriters tell me that my stuff was good. And real musicians say, okay, Ben, I'll co-write with you. So I'm not promising anyone I will be a collaborator. I mean, if you want to pitch me, let me hear what you got. But more likely, I can just encourage you because I think so many people have great stuff that's hidden in a drawer. Take it out of the drawer, people. Share it with the world. The world wants to hear your stuff, and I'm glad to encourage you.